Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Life Planning Network meeting of July 2022. I'll just make a few quick announcements, and then I'm going to introduce Rodney. We'll dispense with, we usually have a sentry, but we'll dispense with that today. And forgive me because I'm recovering from a bit of the flu, so I'm not sure how long my voice will hold up. But at any rate, just a couple of things. We have the August newsletter. If you have items for it, please have them in by August 24th, no later, but 20th would be better. And many of you may have seen that in the last newsletter, we announced the Meg Newhouse Poetry Prize. If you didn't see it, we'll run it again, but please do what you can to circulate that. We'd like to get as many folks, and we're thinking about doing a essay prize as well on the subject of aging. So we'll take that next. In September, we're going to do, on September 29th, we'll do loss and grief webinar led by Carolyn Walter of Philadelphia chapter, who is, I am told, I've never seen her present, exceptional. And there are a bunch of other members who we're meeting with who have lost significant others, spouses, children over the last few years. So we're trying to carve out a way of doing it both, making a follow-up on the following Monday so we can continue the conversation in a meaningful way. But I think it's going to be a great session. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Rodney. As most of you know from reading the various promotional material, Rodney is a veteran journalist who writes about retirement and personal finances and racial and wealth and health disparities. His columns currently run in U.S. News and World Report, AARP Senior Planet, and he has columns in the Washington Post and USA Today, TheStreet.com, and is a contributor to the National Geographic, as well as Next Avenue, Forbes, and others. Rodney and I both worked at USA Today during the same time, but Rodney's tenure, 30 years, was somewhat longer than mine by a good bit. And he was the retirement columnist over those years, and also deputy managing editor. And he coordinated all the personal finance articles across all of the different platforms. We're delighted to have him today as the author of Fixing the Racial Wealth Gap. I guess you haven't seen it. I'm not sure it works too well on this thing. The book's subtitle, which is Racism and Discrimination Put Us Here, but this is how we can save future generations, tells you a lot about what's in the book. He spends a bit of time at the beginning on some of the structural and institutional and historical things that have pervaded 400 years of history and got us here. But he also gives very personal and important answers that would apply to anyone, regardless of their race. I've found it really instructive myself. And, you know, as Rodney, I'm sure we'll talk about, the critical importance of financial literacy can play in helping to fix the racial wealth gap, as well as societal strategies like reparations that may be able to help as well. So it's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Rodney to you and to let him take it away.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and thank you everyone for joining us. You can learn a lot writing a book like I did with my latest effort, which is Fixing the Racial Wealth Gap. Racism and discrimination put us here, but this is how we can save future generations. I researched the history of the social and economic racism that is responsible for the wealth gap. And I discuss in some detail some of the possible solutions. So, the history of racism and discrimination and violence runs deep. Every time Black Americans made progress in American history, it was taken away legally, like when the Manhattan Beach, California City Council used eminent domain in the 1920s to take away property from a Black couple that operated a resort catering to Blacks, or illegally, like when vibrant Black middle-class communities like Tulsa and Tulsa, Oklahoma, and dozens of other American cities were burned to the ground. The result is that Black Americans are way behind white Americans in just about every economic statistic. We can talk about, while we're talking in history, we can talk about things like when the Black GIs returned from World War II, many people don't realize, they were denied the benefits of the GI Bill of 1944. Black veterans were systematically denied the housing and educational and loan provisions of the bill. Developers, with the blessing of federal agencies, by the way, even prohibited the Black Americans from living in Levittown, Pennsylvania, where affordable homes were built for veterans. In fact, the discrimination was so deep, it was written into the covenants. So as a result, white GIs and their families were able to accumulate generational wealth through home ownership with the assistance of FHA and VA. The median white family has 10 times the wealth of the median Black family, according to a number of surveys, especially one by the economic impact of closing the wealth gap by McKinsey & Company, which is a management consultant. And Black Americans can expect to earn $1 million less than white Americans in their lifetimes. Prosperity Now, which is a nonprofit advocacy group, said in a report that the median net worth of Black families will be zero by 2053 if nothing is done. And another reason high and middle income white families are so much wealthier than Black families of similar age and income is inheritances. Speaking of generational wealth, economists say inheritances account for more of the racial wealth gap than any other demographic or socioeconomic indicator. So one of the surprises for me, though, is that there are tried and true solutions, but they are not likely to be applied to Black America in numbers large enough to resolve the issue. And no one of these solutions is likely to solve the problems in itself. So we could talk about improving financial literacy in the Black community, talk about so-called baby bond solution proposed by Cory Booker, housing programs that would reduce the gap between Black and white home ownership, and even some guaranteed income programs that have proven to be pretty successful. We can discuss the pros and cons of reparations, which is probably the most controversial of all of them. So let's start with financial literacy. Many people, economists, financial planners, educators, Black and white, believe financial literacy is a key tool to help close the wealth gap. I agree. It's critically important that we increase the level of, it's critically important that we increase the level of financial knowledge in the Black community. So, there's evidence that it works. Students who take financial literacy classes at a young age were less likely to take on high interest loans like payday loans, less likely to depend on high interest credit cards. And this is according to the National Endowment for Financial Education. But people like economist Andre Perry, who is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, said in the column, quote, Financial literacy courses won't solve the racial wealth gap. Stop blaming Black people for the exploitation that has stolen away their wealth for generations. And I'm going to continue his quote. While teaching high schoolers good financial habits is wonderful, it's absurd to maintain that doing so will close the racial wealth gap. Black people can save every discretionary cent for the next 250 years, and it would still not close the racial gap in this country. There are many who agree with Perry, but the fact is that financial literacy must be a part of a larger plan. It's just one piece of the plan. Now let's talk about baby bonds. Now, the idea of baby bonds was first proposed by economists like William Darity at Duke University and Derek Hamilton. They did a report. Derek Hamilton is at the New School for Social Justice. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker has actually proposed legislation that would create a federally funded savings plan for every child born in the US. Okay. The accounts will begin with $1,000 with an additional $2,000 up to an additional deposit of up to $2,000 annually until the child turns 18, and the amount depends on the family's income. The child would gain access to the money to buy a home or pay college tuition when they reach 18. An analysis by Morningstar Financial Services concluded that baby bonds by themselves would cut America's racial gap in half after the first children reach their 18th birthday. And Morningstar said that while baby bonds would not be a panacea, they hold promise for addressing the wealth gap. Well, their report said, we believe policymakers should explore ways to make them a reality. Booker's plan, according to his plan, by age 18, the poorest children will have about $46,200. The children of the wealthiest parents would have roughly $1,700. Despite having a dozen co-sponsors in the Senate, including Senator Chuck Schumer, 8 co-sponsors in the House, the legislation has not advanced. It has 0 support from Republicans. And in polls, baby bonds are favored by 42% of Americans, 53% of Black Americans, and 37% of white Americans. Now, another solution proposed is guaranteed income. California has budgeted a pilot guaranteed income program that will provide grants, that will provide guaranteed incomes to participants in an effort to reduce poverty. Stockton, California started a pilot program in 2019 under former Mayor Michael V. Stubbs. The city gave $500 a month to 125 residents of the city's low-income neighborhoods for 2 years. After the first year, a study was conducted by independent researchers, and that study found that full-time employment rose among those who received the guaranteed income, and their financial, physical, and emotional health improves. An organization called Mayors for Guaranteed Income, it was a group founded by former Mayor Tubbs, says pilot programs have been started in a number of cities and counties across the nation. That brings us to housing assistance. Now, according to numbers from the Urban Institute, the Black home ownership rate is 42.3%, compared to home ownership rate among whites of 72.2%. Left unaddressed, Urban Institute said the Black home ownership rate will fall even further by 2040. Last year, a group of housing and civil rights groups and leaders announced an initiative to significantly increase the nation's Black home ownership rate. The Black Home Ownership Collaborative, which is a coalition of 100 organizations and individuals, they want to bring Black home ownership up to the level of white home ownership, which would require 5 million additional Black homeowners, or an increase in the Black home ownership rate of 72%. The group wants to create 3 million new Black homeowners by 2030 through a 7-point program to achieve it and achieve this goal within 9 years. Homeownership counseling, down payment assistance, housing production, credit and lending, civil and consumer rights, homeowner sustainability, and marketing outreach. The group also called for increased funding for housing counseling services and a targeted down payment assistance program. Now let's talk about reparations. Okay. I talked about Darity, who basically authored the paper on baby bonds, but William Darity and his wife, Kristen Mullin, wrote a book, From Here to Equality. And it's basically about making the case for reparations. In this book, they say the total amount of reparations should be dictated by the amount necessary to eliminate the wealth disparities between Black and white Americans. Okay? So that will require an expenditure of 10 to 12 billion, or 200,000 to 250,000 per eligible recipient annually over 10 years. Okay. That would, they say, bring wealth in Black communities in line with the wealth of white communities. The House Judiciary Committee voted H.R. 40, reparations bill, out of committee in last year. And that bill was originally introduced by the late Representative John Conyers of Detroit in 1989. There are now 200 House co-sponsors and over 20 Senate co-sponsors for a national reparations law. Still, passage is unlikely. That legislation is strongly opposed by Senate Republicans. And a nationwide poll from the University of Amherst and WCVB found that 60% of the people who responded were opposed to reparations to descendants of enslaved people. A Reuters poll separately found that only 20% of respondents supported reparations. My only hope is that we see parts of each of these programs at some point in the future. There's a lot happening on the local level. We saw communities like Asheville, North Carolina, Evanston, Indiana, pass reparations bills during the height of the social justice movement during the pandemic last year. 11 US mayors, including the mayors of Los Angeles and Denver, agreed to pay reparations to small groups of Blacks in their cities. Now, the programs would compensate for past wrongs, but the mayors did not offer details on what the programs would cost or how recipients would be chosen. However, I should point out that some of the strongest proponents of reparations do not consider those programs to be true reparations because they don't put money directly into the pockets of the descendants of formerly enslaved people. Roger Ferguson, in an interview, told me, Roger Ferguson is the former CEO of TIAA, the giant financial services company. He said, none of these things is a silver bullet or magic wand. And the reason I think there is no silver bullet is it's taken us literally hundreds of years to get to this place. And hopefully, I don't think it'll take 100 years to fix it, but I think it will take some time to undo the the centuries of damage. So with that quote, I'll end and open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you, Rodney, for that really nice overview of the book. We're a small enough group, so if you want to just open up your mic and ask a question, or if you want to raise your hand, I'll call on you. Let me just flip this view. Erin, I see you, so shoot.
Hi, thank you so much for this extremely eye-opening conversation, and I apologize my video was off. I am, per usual, commuting between clients. I'm fascinated by the baby bonds, and for someone that self-proclaims does not have much financial literacy, this has been a great motivator for me to do a real deep dive. I work with older adults and specialize in the financial welfare of people over the age of 62, and looking at this in reverse direction, establishing young adults for success to help minimize that divide seems to me like a no-brainer. And I look forward to diving into this further to learn more, but you just really, all of it is very relevant, but the baby bonds is specifically really fascinating to me. So thank you for sharing. I will take his work further and look into it more.
Okay, actually, I could add that Rick Edelman, who is basically a financial expert, also came out in support of a baby bond. His would be funded differently through corporations, but it's basically the same concept of providing the money to build to babies as they're born. Bruce, I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Betsy, would you unmute yourself?
It's brilliant. To me, it makes sense. The foundation, the building blocks, it makes so much sense.
Betsy, are you there?
Yes, sorry, someone else seemed to be talking, so thanks, Aaron. I'm coming, my context for being excited about today is that I lead a college mentoring program at one of the City University schools in New York. And so this is a group of businesswomen mentoring college students. We've now been around for 20 years. And so it's a population that is a mix of, say, a lot of immigrant, first-generation immigrants, first-generation college students who in general are moving into high-paying jobs. And yet, for instance, one of our former students who's now probably mid-30s said, no one ever told me about investing until I was, 6-8 years into my career. So I feel like I lost a lot of opportunity. So one of the things I very much want to do is to help create, and this would be a focus on the financial literacy piece, but a piece that would bring together people over maybe a 20 years of graduation and an ongoing program that would create understanding and then work toward goals. So if you have any suggestions, Rodney, I would very much appreciate that, and I'd be happy to follow up afterward. But so I think what you're saying is extremely important. I would expand it. So I think there are other populations where there is also a potential wealth gap, although clearly very different from Black Americans.
Okay, well, the numbers are kind of similar with Hispanics as well. And I should say the reason I wrote the book in the first place was that people, knowing my interest in financial planning and literacy, have been after me for years to write a book specifically aimed at the financial literacy of Black Americans, because Black Americans have such a unique set of problems. And I just felt like I could not do that without talking about how we got there in the first place. So we had to deal with the chapters on the history of discrimination and racism and what sort of led us here before we got into the actual financial literacy parts of the book.
One of the things that's so fascinating, eye-opening in the book, is the depth of distrust in the Black community that probably I don't think most whites are aware of. So that both the depth of distrust and the lack of kitchen table education, so that you cite, so that there is no building block generationally for the educations. Maybe you could talk to that a little, which I found really interesting.
Yes. So many, I talked to, actually I talked to one colleague who basically his fiance was white, and he sat down with their white families, and he came back and said, well, their dinner discussions were nothing like the discussions that we had at my house. And that's not to say that every white family at the dinner table talks about stocks, but there is almost no discussion, and I hear this repeatedly, of finances or stocks and bonds, or basically how much things cost among Black families. I talked to one person in the book, a former corporate executive who now is an entrepreneur, but she talked about her name, Dawn Kelly. She runs basically a health food shop in Queens now, but she was at the Prudential for years. She said when she was a kid, her mom made her write out the checks to pay the bills. And because of that, she knew what everything costs. And also because of that, she knew to not ask for anything because she knew there was no money left. As opposed to parents today who pay their kids cell phones, and there is no sense. I was talking to a guy who goes in and teaches financial literacy at a school in DC. He said these kids have no sense of what cable television costs, what their cell phones cost, because their parents don't. They just pay it. They don't have a discussion of it. So, I'm a firm believer we need to talk more about not only what things cost, but what we make, and what the mortgage is and what the rent is, so people have a concept of a kid. These kids have a concept of what things cost, and have some sense of why it's important to invest.
Doug, I'm going to call on you. Thank you, Rodney. Just one thing too that I keep thinking about. I can't remember precisely the date, but it was something like 1974 was the first certified Black financial advisor. I was just bowled over by that. Is that?
Yes, he's actually still practicing. He's in his 80s. He's actually in his 80s today, and because I'm getting older, I can't. His name is on the tip of my tongue, but
You're ancient.
but he just wrote a book, which he sent to me. His name is LeCount. LeCount. Now, if I can remember his last name, it'll come to me before this is over. But yes, he is, and I checked with the Financial Planning Association, and they say that's probably right. They don't have records, but that's probably right.
Astonishing. Doug, you had your hand up.
Well, Luanne has been waiting longer than me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you, Luanne. Your yellow hand blended in with the.
Right. And my question might be a little premature, Rodney. You may be getting to some of this, but when I think about the racial disparity, obviously that becomes more and more important as people move into the retirement age. And I am quite involved in people aging without children, this huge demographic that's going to be, all in their 80s at the same point and not have anyone to care for them. And I'm just wondering, when they cite these percentages, 20% of these people don't have children, that's obviously all races. But in the Black community, would you say that more families do have children, and that in fact, as a result of that, there is some comfort for the older adults to say, okay, my kids will take care of me, or they'll be there for me, more so than say, that the average, demographic that we're talking about now, 20% of them don't have children. Do most older Black people have kids, and are they relying on them to help them as they age?
You might think that's the case, but it's not. All the studies show that older Black people end up alone, especially Black women. They end up living alone and in poverty as they age. Now, there are actually the issues get worse as they age because, well, for one thing, there are an enormous number of health disparities we haven't even talked about. So Black Americans suffer much higher incidences of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, just about I think if you can look at 20 of the top most prevalent diseases, Black Americans suffer disproportionately from like 14 of those, including dementia. For some reason, they still haven't figured out why Black Americans suffer higher rates. But also, because of all of these health disparities, there are all these medical issues. So you're at the same time when you're on Social Security, because Black Americans have, because for a whole another set of reasons, including, they don't earn as much, minimum wage jobs, they end up with lower Social Security checks. So at the time when they're at this reduced income level, they're having a higher level of medical issues. So, as I've written a story, actually I read a story for Crisis Magazine of aging while Black, particularly as Black Americans age, the health issues and the economic issues get considerably worse. Did that answer your questions?
Yes, no, thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Great. Doug, would you go ahead and ask? Thank
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Rodney. I've very much enjoyed, well, I shouldn't use the word enjoy, but appreciate your analysis. The thing that occurs to me in listening to these proposals is, how unlikely it seems that anything at federal level will or can be done about this. I mean, we've seen this not just in the recent past, and the kind of the place that we're stuck in now, but also in the distant past, right? There's been failure, as you've identified. Even in the cases where there has been progress made, there's been steady erosion over time of those the milestone events. So I think we can't wait for the federal government to do something about this. And as is true in many other issues, many other fronts, it really falls to more local jurisdictions, either at the state level or regional or municipal level. And you've cited a couple of examples where there have been some admittedly meager efforts to take some steps. But I'm wondering if in the course of the research that you did or the thinking that you've put into this, if you have some recommendations, and I think some of these things may fit into that category. Financial literacy, for example, can be done at a local level. But I'm wondering if you've given any thought to which of these lend themselves to action that doesn't require the federal government and how you would prioritize them and see or assess their impact over time.
Well, I think the direct income example was a good one because that one was done on the local level, and then they followed it up. So that just showed that things are more likely to happen on the local level with cities and possibly even states, some states. But I think you also have to think about corporate America. During the pandemic, you saw just every major corporation you could think about came out with some sort of program that they were pumping money into Black communities one way or another, buying more from Black businesses. And so that makes things like, the baby bonds thing where it probably won't happen on the federal level. Rick Edelman of the financial expert, basically his proposal would have the money coming from corporations. So I think local level, possibly state level, and I think we have to put some pressure on these corporations because as William Darity says in his book, actually he didn't say in the book, but in an interview, local and state governments were complicit in the racism and discrimination, and so were corporations.
Yep.
You're still on mute, Bruce. Bruce, you're on mute. It's the okay.
Is he talking?
Sorry, I've got such a bad cough. I keep muting myself so you don't have to be tortured by it. But at any rate, thank you. I think that Meg may have been next, and then Barbara, and
Joan.
Barbara.
Barbara first. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I'll talk. I'll be Barbara. I'm Joan.
Okay, Joan.
Um,
Joan,
well,
why don't you say what you do?
what do I do?
Yeah,
I'm a professor at Boston University in the School of Public Health,
Yeah,
and I teach
great.
leadership. Basically, that's what I do. In addition to a whole bunch of other things, but that's the one I can claim. But anyway, what's interesting to me is that Harvard, as you may well know, just came out with their complete report of their complete involvement in the enslavement of people, to the extent of that in the 1700s, they will admit at least 40% of the income that came into Harvard University came from enslaved properties in the Caribbean, from investors in those properties. Harvard was pretty much built by people who made their money through slavery. And also their research really shows that the North is 100% complicit, 100%. You can't claim you were in the North and you weren't benefiting from slavery. I mean, all of modern industry benefited from the cotton industry. It all did. So what they've done, but what they did was shocking in their immediacy. They put $1 billion into a fund immediately. Now, of course, there's debate about what university is going to do with $1 billion. They also, not only African Americans, the Native American peoples, Harvard built on top of their backs. So there's, what will they do with the money? They're not going to give anyone cash. They'll make programs that will educate people so that the entire education, I went through there in the 70s and it was very hard to get a truthful history out of them. They've only just begun to tell truthful histories, just begun. So at that level, I think things could happen, but that's all I have to say. It's a pretty big, huge crime they're sitting on top of.
Okay, and let me, I talked about Bruce's Beach in California, where this Black couple at the turn of the century basically had the land taken away. First the Klan blocked access to it because they didn't like Black families going to the beach. But the LA County Council just returned that beach to the families, to the descendants. So I mean, but this was a case where generational wealth was basically robbed. But they actually looked and they said, this is wrong, and this property is worth millions of dollars, and they returned it to the descendants of the Bruces. So there is some of that going on.
Yeah. Thank you, Rodney. Meg?
Okay, thank you, Rodney. I'm sorry I had to be late and I missed a little bit of your presentation. And my question, well, I had two questions. One of them Doug asked, and I really believe that we are going to have to concentrate on local governments, maybe state or regional, and corporations. And now I've added maybe big nonprofits like universities to the list. I'm going to risk asking a really pessimistic and way out question. This whole program, I think, assumes the financial system we have now. And I'm thinking that, well, I'm one of those who thinks about the very non-trivial possibility that our whole system is going to collapse. And I'm just wondering if everybody, not just Blacks, should be preparing for that and thinking about what a new economy might look at and how we might dig ourselves out of a collapse in a much more enlightened way.
Oh, okay. What a question. Well, you know, so I guess the best way I can answer that is every time if there is a collapse, every time there has been any type of economic collapse, including the pandemic, Blacks and other minorities have come out much worse than they were when they went in. Okay, and that includes the pandemic. That includes the you hear about the Depression, but God, when you look at some of the stories about what happened to Black Americans during the Depression, those things aren't bubbling up to the top. You're talking about in the unemployment, unbelievable numbers. And I did a story on what happened to Black communities during the Spanish, actually the flu. I hesitated calling it Spanish flu because it wasn't really the Spanish flu, and I was corrected because many of you may not know it was only called the Spanish flu because in Spain, that was the only country to be able to report that the flu was happening because we were going into World War I, and Americans did not want all the allies did not want the enemy to know how depleted their forces were by this. But the recession, the housing collapse, look at the 2007, 2008 recession. Black Americans lost so much wealth and generational wealth, and they still have not recovered from that. So any kind of economic collapse is only going to be more devastating to not only Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, immigrants.
Yeah, that's such an important point. I think I've mentioned to you, I have a friend, Tom Shapiro, who teaches at Brandeis, who wrote a book called Toxic Inequality. And he had done a prior book 20 odd years ago in which he looked at racial disparities. And then he went back a few years ago and looked at the cohort of people who were part of his book and analyzed what happened. And many of them progressed quite well over the 20 years until 2008. And with 2008, proportionally, they were set back far graver than any other group. And one of the things that strikes me as critical in what Tom analyzed was that in Black families, children, there's much more sharing of the debt and the need to care for the rest of the family. So when one member in the family fell on hard times or had difficulty, they contributed their wealth to support that person. It's a dilemma, obviously, and something you point out in the book as well about older adults jeopardizing their retirements by taking care of their children. But it's certainly something that's hurt Black Americans, I think.
Mhm.
So, what Rodney, when you look through your very realistic lens, do you think is going to move the needle the most at this point in a realistic way?
I'm trying to think of how to say it in a non-political way, right?
Feel free.
Because
you're among friends.
because all of the issues and all of the programs are strongly opposed by the Republican Party. So I think the more, and that's why you see more things happening in cities that are controlled by Democratic mayors and states controlled by Democratic governors, like California. So one thing I think is if you continue another 4 years of Democratic rule in the Senate and the White House, you might see some action. If you see more states, so I think it's going to happen more in the more liberal, the more democratic states than it is, and so you'll see it on, I think, the coasts, the north, the west coast, and not necessarily the south, but maybe you will see it in cities in the south as opposed to states in the south, and we'll have to see if corporations stick to doing what, somebody has to go back and look at all of this money that was promised by all of these corporations, and I actually listed them in the book. Did they really spend it? Did they really give it? Did they really give it to Black businesses? Did they really make the donations to HBCUs? Did they really do all the things that they said they were going to do? And secondly, are they going to continue, or was it were they just doing it because of the George Floyd protests?
Good point. Betsy, did you have another question, or is your hand's just still up from before? Not yours. Okay, Kendall, unmute yourself.
Sorry, I did have another question.
You did? Oh, okay,
Yes.
great. All right, Betsy, go ahead, and then Kendall, you jump in.
Sure. So Rodney, you just mentioned HBCUs, and that made me think, again, it's an especially thoughtful and proactive group of both leaders, educators, and students and alums. And I wondered if in your work, you see, again, I understand there are big structural issues, but are there more tactical activities led by those institutions of higher education?
HBCUs have at one time they did provide that kind of leadership. The lack of funding over the years and the loss of prestige damaged that. But in more recent years, they have been receiving much stronger funding, and a whole new generation of young Black Americans are are applying to and going to these schools. Young bright students who would have gone to major white universities. And also, I mean, if you look at the talent that is also being attracted, so I think I think that is a good, that's some hope there, because you're seeing basically corporations, individuals giving to HBCUs. A number of them have received the largest donations in history in just the last year. And you see young Black athletes who would star at major universities now picking HBCU. So there's a revival going on there, and I think there'll be more, as the years go by. I think you're going to see them have a larger impact on the Black community.
Kendall, thank you very much for that answer, Rodney. Kendall?
Thank you. This is so illuminating. I wondered if there's something more to be learned from that incident you mentioned, where the family was given back their property.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that they suggest, something that broader that could happen, and wondered if there's also any examples, and maybe internationally, multiculturally, that where there have been, I mean, in a way that's sort of a form of reparations, where that has been possible, even on a small level.
Yeah, that one was so, we talked about, some of the previous questions, how things aren't likely to happen on the federal level. That was a decision by the LA County Board that we need to give this back. I mean, basically, this beach, we took it illegally, in like 1910, 1912. And all of this generational wealth was lost because it was such a thriving, they had hotels, and Black families came and basically vacationed there until they started blocking access, and people started complaining. And the Klan actually did block access to the beach to keep Black families from going. So, and they looked at the history, but this was, again, the local level. And I think if anything else like that happens, it's going to be county, city, state. You're not likely to see anything happen right now on the federal level. And maybe some corporations will step up, with some similar, we know some of the universities have, we heard about Harvard, we did Georgetown, I think. Georgetown did something similar. So some of the universities are stepping up. So if it happens at all, that's where it'll happen. Universities, cities, and counties.
And just a quick comment and follow up on that. I think in some ways, what we've seen throughout history is that governments follow, right? They don't take initiative that starts things. They wait until enough has happened to give the politicians who are responsible for making these decisions political cover. And I think that's another argument, I think, for the kind of action that you just described on a more local and regional level. Because I think it's those steps that accumulate over time, and not only do they begin to have the kind of impact that I think we all would like to see, but I think they also have then the potential for changing attitudes and for providing the kind of political cover for broader action to occur.
Thank you, Doug. We're almost at the top of the hour, but I had a couple of questions that I was reserving. So I was wondering remember reading a lot about the Pigford cases with the Black farmers who sued. And I think they were originally awarded something like 20 billion in reparations, and then that was knocked down because of the discriminatory practices of the agriculture department. Are there any lessons that have been learned that from those cases? And I know I read recently some story about the further decline of Black farmers in America. So is there anything that you know of, to any movement to support Black farmers that's afoot?
There, there is movement. I don't know that Black farmers will ever recover from that. I think the last numbers I saw was Black farmers represent 2% of all farmers. I mean, the numbers have dropped that dramatically because they could not get that kind of help. It's too late for a revival. If there is any hope, the hope is that it'll get to the families of those who were discriminated against and to those who are still farming. We can talk about what they did in the past and almost assume or think that stuff isn't still going on. But if you read the stories about Black families putting their houses on the market and the appraisals of being lowballed and if they take out any trace of Black families and replace it with, there were several places where they replaced it with their neighbors' white pictures, and appraisals went up by $100,000 or more. So, so that stuff is still going on, especially in the real estate industry. So, so lessons learned. I mean, if there's anything, it's just that, that it's more subtle, but it's still happening and it's still impacting generational wealth.
Are there any last questions for Rodney? I have one more, but I'll let somebody else jump in if anyone has any last questions. No. Okay. So first of all, I neglected to say at the beginning that Rodney was recently inducted into the Black Journalists Hall of Fame. So congratulations on that, Rodney.
Thank you.
I guess what I would ask is, I know you don't practice financial consulting, but I also know that you've taken a personal interest in people who came into the workplace and shepherded them and bludgeoned them into doing the right thing. What do you tell young people that you meet? When you talk about financial planning to young people, and then I would also ask to older people, Black or white, who didn't save enough. So those two categories of the young and the person who's older but did not save enough. What do you tell them?
The first book event I had virtual over Zoom, I was talking about what was in the book, and there were probably 50 people in the audience, and in the end, there were 5 or 6 people who basically gave testimonials, which was a surprise. But they basically, one person just talked about how when she was 20 years old, I pulled her into a room and said, just sign this paper. This is your 401k. You need to do this. And she didn't understand it, but she signed on. And from that, she was able to take a loan and buy her house. So the thing I tell young people all the time is, if you have access to a 401k, you need to stop making excuses, sign up for it, and put as much as you can, and increase your donations over time. especially make your don't put in as much as the company match, because otherwise you're not taking advantage of free money. So the 401k, the thing, I tell even my children, it gets you start to saving, and it gets you to understanding a little bit more about stocks and bonds and mutual funds. Older people, I tell mostly that it's not too late to learn. There's a school, basically Ariel Financial, basically in Chicago, run by basically Melody Hobson is the president, who was but it's basically a Black financial company, and they started basically a school called Ariel Academy in Chicago in the South Side. So they basically started teaching financial literacy, and it goes K through 8 in the kindergarten. And as those kids grow up, they learn about stocks, and they learn about they learn about investing. They do field trips. But it relates to your question. But I tell older people is that while those kids are learning, their parents are learning just as much. Okay, so it's not too late to learn, I can't say wait before you take Social Security, because that's so subjective, but also most people take Social Security early because they have to. They need the money. So to make sure that their children and their grandchildren know more about finance than they did. That's my biggest advice for older Black Americans.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rodney, for giving us your time and your intelligence and thoughts today. We greatly appreciate it. We will have this recording up for the people who are all on vacation to see, but I highly recommend reading Rodney's book, which you probably can't see particularly well, The Fixing of the Racial Wealth Gap, but I really found it educative and was grateful for it. And deeply appreciate your sharing your time with us today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.